having my coffee. I need my coffee, all right? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Professor Rich, and this is Learning English. I'm feeling in the kind of mood where I'm going to speak quite fast today. So if you find it difficult to understand, sorry about that. This is supposed to be an advanced series, so I want to challenge some of the people who have a slightly higher level. As always, there will be a PDF with useful phrases and comprehension tests in. You should be able to find that below this video on YouTube. And if you're looking at this video from my Facebook channel, then there should also be a link there on the Facebook channel. If not, then just go to YouTube and it will definitely be below the video on YouTube, okay? And I would appreciate feedback on that because I'm still developing ideas for what to put in there. I mean, for example, I could put Spanish translations. Do you want Spanish translations? Or do you prefer just the phrases in English with definitions in English? I don't know. I need information. You need to tell me. I have no idea. Right, anyway, I can see this one is going to take quite a lot of editing. This is actually quite a difficult topic to talk about. So what am I going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about British people. Now, I obviously really like British culture. If you couldn't tell from the way that I have branded my Professor Rich website with the Union Jack, it's actually, if you really know your flags, the flag that I have on my website is not actually the Union Jack. Now there's no particular reason for that, it's just that the flag that I've used looks a little bit better than the actual Union Jack. So it is similar, but that flag actually has another name. But that's not important. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about British people. So what can I say about British people? Let's talk about the negatives first. Because I know that in Spain, British people have a certain reputation and there are certain negatives that people, I think, would like to hear about British people from a British person's perspective, from my perspective. What do I think? Okay, so I think the first thing that you have to say about British people is that they are really terrible at talking about their feelings, particularly when those feelings are negative, and especially when those feelings involve embarrassment or being upset. Now, when British people are upset or embarrassed, what they normally do is they do what we call get in a mood, and they just stop talking to people. So British people very often, when they get upset in this way, they sort of seclude themselves from their friends and they just want their own space and they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to see anyone and they just want time to pass and just to feel better. And I do this as well. Okay, this is something that British people are just quite bad at, okay? So another stereotype of a British person is someone sitting in a restaurant and the food's terrible and there's lots of problems, and instead of saying anything about it, they just kind of sit there looking like unhappy or annoyed, and they just in their head, they're like, oh, this is terrible, the food's terrible, blah, blah, blah. But they don't actually do anything about it. They don't express those feelings in a controlled and productive way. Now that stereotype is absolutely true. I don't think that there's any Briton who would disagree with that stereotype. Okay? Of course, not everyone's like that. That's why we call it a stereotype. But I think as a whole, you can make that generalization. So the second negative stereotype that I'm going to talk about, I think connects quite nicely to the one that I was just speaking about, and that is that British people can be quite hot and cold. Now, what that means is they can be very friendly and inviting when they're in a good mood. So if you find a British person in a good mood, they're like, hey, how's it going? And even if you're someone that they don't know very well, they can be very, very happy and very polite, and they can be very welcoming. This stereotype of English people being very cold, I think, is very inaccurate. And I think anyone who's lived in Britain anywhere other than London, because yes, London is different, will know that this stereotype is actually inaccurate. However, when when British people are in a bad mood, or when they have a hangover, or when they're not particularly feeling very sociable, they can be very cold, and they don't necessarily realize that they are acting like that. So you have this kind of stereotype of the English person who, when he's kind of happy, well-fed, or drunk, then he's like very friendly and inviting. And when he's sober or hungover, or it's just the wrong kind of day, then he's very distant and silent. And I think that does apply, and I can think of a few of my friends who that very accurately describes. Probably describes me quite well as well. So anyway, there's that one. Just a tip for this one. If you want to put a British person in a good mood and you want them to be more sociable, make them a cup of tea. It's a good tip. I recommend that one. Make them a cup of tea. If you make me a cup of tea, I will be smiling and happy all day long. Although today I have had a coffee rather than a tea. Anyway, next subject. Okay, I don't really want to talk about this one that much because everyone knows about it. You have, of course, the football hooliganism. British people, when they're drunk, can be quite aggressive, and it's a cultural thing. It's cultural. For some reason, in Britain, people grow up and they get into this football culture and they start fighting or whatever, and in other countries it doesn't necessarily happen as much, and I think it's a terrible thing, and I think it's probably one of the most shameful things that we have about our culture, and really it's something that we should try hard to change. Okay, so moving on to the positives. Politeness. The idea that British people are very polite is absolutely true, 100%. Maybe not the most polite people in the world, but I don't think we should be any more polite than what we are now. I think we are polite enough. If you want to talk about people who are more polite, I think you have to talk about people from Japan, the Japanese. I think they are just incredible, so polite, it's ridiculous. But I think British people have a great level of politeness. And I'll tell you a little story about this. When I visited Gibraltar last year, I did a little road trip through the south of Spain, and we stopped in Gibraltar. And I was standing outside a post office. I wanted to send some postcards to England from Gibraltar. And I was standing outside the post office, and someone was stood in the way with their back to me in the door, and they were facing inside the shop, and I was like, oh no, it's one of those situations when, you know, I'll have to tap them on the shoulder and they might not realize, and then eventually they'll turn around and they'll say, oh, sorry, or whatever, perdón, as people do in Spain. I was like, okay. And I stepped forward to ask them to move out the way, and then something crazy happened. They stepped to the side, they looked back, saw me, and they said, oh, sorry, mate. And they just offered their hand and kind of gestured for me to pass. And I was like, oh my God, it's British people. And from living in Spain for 2 years, I was just completely not used to that kind of behavior. And I had forgotten that really that is how people behave in Britain. In Spain, people just don't have this awareness that anyone's around them. There's no spatial awareness. There's no, oh, you go before me. You know, there's no queues for the bank. There's no queues for well, there are queues in the bank. That's unfair. But anyway, politeness is something that I really, really like about British culture. I think it's a great thing. Next thing, and actually the last thing that I'm going to talk about, because this video is taking way too long, and as you can tell, I've had to do a lot of editing. Sense of humor. British sense of humor. Now, this is something that Spanish people don't necessarily understand, because I think to really get British sense of humor, you have to have a great level of English, and that's what we're trying to improve right now. So yeah, if you get to a good level, in fact, if you're understanding most of what I'm saying now, then you're at a level where you should start embracing the British sense of humour, because it really is fantastic. And I'm going to give you a couple of recommendations you may have heard or may not have heard. You've got the classics, like I've got a little list here. You've got the classics, like for example, Monty Python. You've got Brass Eye, Black Adder, and Red Dwarf. These are all some British comedy classics, and I recommend absolutely every single one of them from the start, more or less, to the finish. Red Dwarf goes a little bit dodgy towards the end there, but the others are fantastic. And then you've got some modern comedy as well. It's absolutely brilliant. You've got Peep Show. Highly recommend that. Every single episode, go all the way through that. It's an absolutely brilliant show. Great way to improve your English as well, if you can understand it. Spaced, that's a great one. And you may have heard of Little Britain. That's great if you like that kind of thing. It can be a little bit crazy at times, a little bit over the top. Not everyone enjoys that kind of thing. It's not quite as disgusting as, for example, Torrente, but it is quite over the top, and at times can be like, but that's, part of why it's funny, really. Okay. So that's really all I have to say. As I mentioned at the start, there should be a downloadable PDF below this video where you can get a comprehension test and you can get some ideas about some of the phrases that I used and things like that. I'm always open to new suggestions. I realize this video has been a little bit kind of here and here and here and all over the place, but never mind, that's just the way things go sometimes. So thank you very much for watching. Please like this video on YouTube, subscribe, do all of that cool stuff. And see you soon. Thanks for watching.